On a particular February afternoon, the sky sat soft and grey, and the trees stood bare and beautiful against it. They stood there as though waiting is not quite the right word. Spring is not something trees wait for. It simply comes, as it always has, as it always will. The trees were only present, completely, utterly present, in the way that only very old and very rooted things know how to be. The lane was quiet. The daffodils had arrived. Oh, the daffodils, best beloved! There they were along the old stone wall, brave and yellow and entirely certain of themselves, nodding their bright heads in the thin February air as though they had never had a single doubt about arriving. And in the old stone wall beneath them, tucked deep into the small mossy beds between the stones, in the particular and practised way of creatures who know exactly how to be still, the snails were sleeping. Mouse slowed as she passed. She looked at them with the expression she kept for things that had earned their rest, the deepest and most serious respect. "Sleep well," she whispered to them very softly, so as not to disturb a single dream. She stood there a moment longer, in the thin February light, her bare toes on the cold stones, looking at the sleeping snails in their homes and the bright daffodils nodding above them, the winter world keeping its own things safe in its own careful ways. And then she walked on, and beneath the hawthorn hedge, still bare, still all fine dark lines, weeks yet from the first white flower, the tiniest wild garlic shoots were pushing up from the dark earth. The glen was pale and hopeful, and still mostly winter, quietly, certainly, beginning. And it was on this afternoon, dear heart, on this thin-lit February afternoon, with its grey sky and its bare arms and its brave daffodils nodding along the wall and its snails sleeping their deep and righteous sleep, that Mouse was walking. She was wearing her good plaid cloak, the one with the wide pockets, the one that had been everywhere with her and knew all her best days. And she had decided on this particular February afternoon to test the fresh air with her bare toes. This, Mouse felt, was important information to have. The lane was cold underfoot, honestly, bracingly, February cold, and the stones were still damp from the morning's rain. Every few steps there was a particularly cold stone that made her catch her breath in the most pleasantly bracing way. And Mouse noted all of this with great interest and complete satisfaction, the way she noted all things the Glen had to tell her, carefully and with her whole attention. Her whiskers were turned up to catch the thin, pale warmth that Sunny was offering from his cautious February position in the corner of the sky, doing his very best in his watercolour coat, trying with everything he had. Mouse was not looking for anything, dear one. She was simply walking. Which is, as old Oak could tell you, and as the Glen has always known, precisely when the most important things are found. She was thinking, pleasantly and without urgency, about whether Hedgehog would have the kettle on when she arrived, whether the wild garlic shoots under the hawthorn hedge were a day further along than yesterday. She thought perhaps they were, she would check on the way back, and whether the daffodils by the gate were the same ones that had come up in that exact spot last February and the February before, which she rather suspected they were, which she found enormously comforting. The faithfulness of daffodils, the way they simply kept their word year after year. And then she saw it. It was the colour that stopped her dear heart, something pale, something the colour of... And here Mouse paused, tilting her head, her spectacles catching the thin February light. Something the colour of a hawthorn petal. She blinked. She looked at the hawthorn hedge, still bare and weeks from flowering, not a single bud yet showing, the branches all dark and patient and thoroughly February still. She looked back at the pale thing tucked beneath the oak root and reached for it carefully. And the moment she touched it, she understood. It was paper, the finest paper she had ever held, so thin and so pale and so warm that her first thought had been hawthorn, which told you everything about who had made it. "Elva," said Mouse very softly, "to no one, and to the Glen, and to the thin, pale afternoon. And somewhere, not close exactly, not far exactly, in the way the little people were never quite where you looked, but always precisely where they needed to be, something small and light moved between the bare branches of the hawthorn hedge, and was still again. Mouse knelt down, her plaid cloak spreading around her on the cold lane, her bare toes pressing into the damp cobblestone beneath her, and she lifted the pale paper with both paws, carefully, the way you lift something that has been left with love, and deserves to be received the same way. The paper was folded with great care, folded the way things are folded when the folding itself is a kind of tenderness, and it was warm, dear heart, warm all the way through, the deep, certain warmth of something that had been kept close and thought about and meant, the warmth that had nothing to do with Sunny, and everything to do with Elva, and the old warmth, the warmth that had been in the island stones and hollow hills, and deep Glen roots since before anyone was counting. Mouse adjusted her spectacles. She began to read the words on the paper. "These stories are magical," said the first hand. "They cheer me up when I'm feeling down," said the second. "I treasure this place," said the third, and the letters were slightly larger here, as though the writer had needed more room for the feeling. "I send them to my daughter," said the fourth. "I want to be a mouse in the Glen," said the fifth. And at this one, dear heart, Mouse stopped. She read it again, and once more, and her whiskers trembled in the way that whiskers do when something has gone directly from the eyes to the heart without stopping anywhere in between, which is the fastest and most important journey anything can make. She turned the page. There were more messages. "Thank you for inviting us in," said one. "You bring comfort and peace," said another. "I look forward to every chapter," said a third, and the ink of this one was slightly smudged, the way ink smudges when a hand has moved across it before it was quite dry, which meant the writer had been in a hurry, which meant the feeling had been urgent, which meant... Mouse pressed the letter very gently to her heart. She held it there a moment, dear one, in the thin February afternoon, in the pale and hopeful light, with the bare arms spread wide above her against the grey sky, the daffodils nodding their bright, certain heads along the old stone wall, and the first tiny wild garlic shoots pushing up green and brave from the dark earth just beside her, her bare toes cold and certain on the damp February cobblestones. And then she looked up. Not at the trees, not at the sky, not at the daffodils or the lane or the far silver line of the sea. At you, dear heart, directly and entirely at you. "These," she said, and her voice was the voice she kept for things that were too large and too warm and too certain for any word that has ever been properly made for them. "These words are for you." Now Mouse cleared her throat, best beloved, because there was something else written on the page. Something in a hand she knew, a hand she would have recognized anywhere, in any light, in any season, in any February, however pale and however grey. She smoothed the page with one careful paw. She read aloud, in her dear and steady voice, each word given the full weight it had earned and deserved. "To every dear visitor of the Glen. Thank you. Thank you for stepping inside this little world. Thank you for reading, for writing, for leaving your kind words along the path. Each one is a lantern hung in the dark. They light the mossy stones. They glow beside the brook. They shine through the cottage windows. They are the reason we are able to gather here at all, around the fire, with warm cups in our paws, telling stories, sharing quiet comfort across the miles and the oceans and all the years between us. You are the light in the glen, long may it continue. Mouse stopped reading. She blinked very carefully, the way one blinks when one is being particularly brave about something. The clock in the cottage at the top of the lane ticked on in his corner, steady and warm and sure. "Tick-tock," he said. Tick-tock, tick-tock, and the fire, which had heard everything. For fires always hear everything, dear heart. Fires have always heard everything. It is one of the things they are for. Gave one long, slow, luminous sigh that was not quite a sound and not quite a light, but was entirely a feeling, the warmest and most certain feeling, without edges, without end. Now this, best beloved, is the part that old Oak himself will tell you if you go to him on a quiet February evening and stand at his roots and ask, the part that happened next, in the pale lane, in the thin, hopeful afternoon, whilst Mouse knelt with the letter pressed to her heart, and the grey sky held itself quietly above, and the daffodils stood bright and faithful along the wall. One by one, dear heart. The lanterns came, small ones first, small as acorn cups, warm as the fire's first breath on a winter morning, tucked between the roots and the cold stones, hung from the lowest bare branches of the oak, nestled in the moss beside the brook, where the water caught their light and carried it downstream, glowing and golden, all the way to the shore. Then larger ones, bright as the daffodils in the thin February sun, bright as Sunny, on a morning when he has forgotten to be cautious and is simply, wholly, entirely himself. Then one's the colour of the wild garlic when it comes in properly in a few weeks' time, that deep and living green, the first true colour of the year. And one, dear heart, one small and particular lantern, the warmest and most golden of all, came to rest in the old stone wall itself, right in amongst the ancient mossy crevices, right in amongst the sleeping snails, so that it glowed there softly, warmly, amber and sure, lighting their dreams from within the wall the way the very best lights do their work, quietly without fuss, whilst everyone they love is sleeping. The snails slept on, best beloved, and that, said the Glen, in the way the Glen says things, in the rustle of the bare hawthorn and the nod of the daffodil and the deep and certain tick of the clock at the top of the lane, was exactly as it should be. Rest, dear ones, said the Glen. You have earned every moment of it. Each one lit, dear one, by a word someone had taken the time to leave, each one burning with the particular warmth of something that was meant. The Glen shimmered, best beloved. The whole of it, the bare arms and the grey sky and the old stone walls and the daffodils and the tiny garlic shoots and the sleeping snails warm in their lantern light, and old Oak at the centre of everything, his great bare arms spread wide, receiving the light of all those lanterns the way he received all light, with the full and unhurried grace of one who has been receiving light for longer than the Glen has had a name. The whole Glen shimmered, the way things shimmer when they have been seen clearly and loved truly, and are lit from within by the knowledge of it. And what of the others, you ask? Rabbit, at the shore in his old brown cloak, his herbs and potions tucked close, felt something warm move through the cold February air from the Glen. Warm as a hand on a shoulder, warm as a word said at exactly the right moment. And he looked up from the sea, and smiled the slow, certain smile of one who had always known this day would come, and had been quietly, patiently glad about it all along. Owl, in his hollow full of books, reached for his best ink, and made a note in his encyclopedia. Carefully, precisely, under the heading he had created for the occasion, in the serious and satisfied tone of one recording something that deserves to be recorded, lanterns human-made, most important kind. See also, kindness, the power of, gratitude, the weight of, words, what they can do when they are meant. See also, snails, contribution of most significant. Hedgehog, who was in the middle of something wonderful in his kitchen, something warm and good that filled the whole cottage with the smell of everything right, looked up and said, "There, just that. There." The kettle sang. The fire crackled. The clock said, tick-tock, 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 as it always did, marking the moment the way it marked all moments, as though each one was worth the full weight of its attention. Because each one was. Because each one always had been. Because that, dear heart, is what clocks who have stood in their corner through every season understand about time. It knows something about time that the rest of us are still, with great happiness, learning. And Elva, dear one, was nowhere to be seen. Which is exactly where the little people of the Glen are when they are most present, most watchful, most entirely and quietly and anciently there, nowhere to be seen and everywhere to be felt, in the warmth of the pale petal paper, in the light of the small lanterns, in the particular quality of the February air in that lane on that afternoon, which was, if you paid the right kind of attention. And in the Glen, dear heart, one always pays the right kind of attention. Older and warmer and more certain than February had any right to be. And full, from its grey sky to its cold, damp cobblestones, of something that could only be described as known. Mouse folded the letter, carefully, slowly, with both paws and the full attention it deserved, the way she did all things that mattered, which was most things. She tucked it into the wide pocket of her plaid cloak, close and safe, against her heart, where it would stay, warm and certain, and kept. For as long as there were stories in the Glen, and fires in the hearths and clocks in the corners and lanterns, dear one, lanterns lit by words left by people like you, which is to say for always, which is to say for ever and considerably beyond that. She stood up in the lane. Her bare toes found the cold cobbles beneath her, and she stood, dear heart, completely and entirely herself. Plaid cloak and wide pockets and bare February toes, and the letter safe against her heart. And she looked at the Glen around her, at everything it was, and everything it held, and everything it would always be. The daffodils nodded at her, bright and faithful. The snails slept on in their wall, warm in their lantern light, dreaming whatever snails dream when they have done everything that was asked of them, and done it splendidly. The tiny wild garlic shoots caught the thin pale light and held it, green and certain and brave. Old oak spread his bare arms wide above her against the grey February sky, and the lanterns glowed warm between his branches, each one a word, each one a gift, each one burning with the particular light of something meant and given freely. Mouse looked at you, best beloved, the way she looked at the first daffodil of February, the way she looked at Sunny finding the moss on the old stone wall, the way she looked at Rabbit's jar of honey and the wild garlic just beginning, and old oak in the thin pale light of a winter afternoon. With her whole self, with everything she had. "We shall keep it," she said, and patted her pocket once, gently, the way you pat something precious that is now perfectly and permanently safe. Then she smiled, dear heart, the full true smile, and she held out one small paw in the thin February light, in the lane with its lanterns and its daffodils and its sleeping snails and its bare and patient oak arms against the grey. Held it out towards you specifically, towards you who came here and read and stayed and left your light along the path without even knowing what you were doing, which is the very best way to leave light. "Come in," she said, softly, warmly, with the certainty of someone who has said this before and means it more each time, and will mean it more still the next time and every time after that. Which is the way the best invitations work? Which is the way the Glen has always worked? Which is the way, dear heart, of all true and lasting things? Come in. There is always... She glanced back at the cottage, at the warm window, at the fire's amber light and the clock's steady face, at the lanterns glowing all the way up the lane, each one a word, each one yours, each one burning bright in the cold and hopeful February dark. Always room by the fire, and that best beloved, dearest heart, sweet and generous soul who lit a lantern in the Glen without even knowing. Is the story of how the lanterns came to the Glen. Mouse has the letter. It is safe in her pocket. Elva left it where it could be found. The daffodils are out. The wild garlic is beginning. The tree arms are bare, patient and beautiful against the February sky. The snails are sleeping in their wall, warm and dreaming, every delivery delivered, every last one. And the lanterns, dear one, your lanterns, are lit. They are lit. The Glen keeps you. It always has. It always will. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock.